Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. Pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, October 18th. We have a very special show in store for you today. We're going to be talking with Rabbi Michael Cohen, who is over in Israel at the moment, as we're speaking here on the same day that President Joseph Biden is in Israel, hoping to help craft some kind of settlement of the hostilities that have broken out again between Israel and primarily the Gazan Palestinians. Many of you know Rabbi Michael Cohen very well. He was the first full-time rabbi in the history of the Israel congregation in Manchester Center, beginning in 1990. And since 2000, he's divided his time between Vermont and the kibbutz Keturah in Israel, which is working for the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies, which is the premier environmental teaching and research program in the Middle East, preparing future Arab and Jewish leaders to cooperatively solve the region's environmental challenges. Rabbi Cohen has also worked at Bennington College in a number of different positions. Rabbi Michael Cohen, thank you very much for making the time during this very difficult moment to be with us and bring us up to speed on what you're seeing over in Israel and your perspective on all these events that have taken place in the last week and a half or so. Very difficult time, I'm sure, to be over in Israel right now.
Yeah, I've been coming here actually since 1966, since I was 8 years old, before the Six-Day War. So I've seen a lot of Israel over the last couple of decades, and obviously since 1996, coming back and forth to the Institute, where we bring together Israelis and Palestinians and use the environment as the bridge, if you will. This is the darkest time I've ever been here. The horror of what happened that Saturday morning. I was actually at services of the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, when we celebrate the reading of the Torah again. And I walked into the synagogue that morning and I could hear someone across the sanctuary in whispered language. I heard the word attack, terrorists, Gaza, war. And she came over to tell me what she was saying, but she didn't need to tell me. I mean, I could tell by her body language and how she was speaking, and I knew it was bad. And as the day unfolded, and particularly by Sunday and early into this week, when we learned about these horrific atrocities, these are not about liberation of a people. This is about atrocities done in the name of a religion that's been hijacked by an organization called Hamas. We haven't seen a massacre of Jews like this, certainly since the Holocaust, and in some ways it was a pogrom of the late 19th century happening in the early 21st century, and it has shocked Israel to its core. If the second Intifada, which we were also here for, put the relations between Israelis and Palestinians back 20 years, this has put us back 100 years to the 1920s. So we are not in a good place at all.
It sounds like there's been a lot of rage and anger in Israel about being kind of caught by surprise by this attack. It sounds like the intelligence services and security forces just weren't expecting this incursion at all.
Yeah, it's clearly a great security failure. What we're learning already now is Hamas has been planning this for 2 years, slow and deliberate. Even as Israel would try to make conditions better and then sometimes worse, depending on what was happening immediately. But they were just clearly, this is where they were going. No matter what Israel did, this is where they were going. No one knows what the future will bring, but I would say there's a very good chance that Prime Minister Netanyahu will not be Prime Minister within 6 months to a year. There's no way that I think, and a lot of people think, he's going to survive. This is Mr. Security, and this was under his watch. And he needs to take responsibility for it. And I think politically that will be one of the outcomes of this.
I'm very curious to hear your assessment of what you think the long-term ramifications of all this will be. But first, I just want to maybe go back a bit, a few months to earlier this summer, when it seemed like in Israel there was a lot of turmoil going on about some of the proposals that Prime Minister Netanyahu was trying to advance with the Israeli Supreme Court, and a lot of demonstrations occurring, reservists saying they weren't going to be available for service because of what was going on. Do you think that contributed to the timing of this decision by Hamas?
That's what some people thought, but like I said, what we're seeing now, from what we're learning, that this is planned, and this was going to happen, and that doesn't seem to be. Now, maybe there wasn't an exact date. We don't know yet, but it seems to be that they were separate. Though perhaps, in the exact date or timing maybe was related to that. But that'll take years to really find out all of that. Well, I will say the country is completely united and working together. The kibbutz here, it's normally a population of around 450 people. We've taken in 380 evacuees, as they're called, from the north. All the kibbutzim down here in the south have done that. People literally have strangers living in their homes. And because Israel is a land of immigrants, a good friend of mine, he's living with a woman who really doesn't speak any Hebrew. She speaks Russian, and she's there with his kid. And that's the kind of coming together that we're seeing, an immense amount of worry. I was supposed to meet an old friend of mine last week who lives across the street in another kibbutz, and he couldn't come because he was attending a funeral. And so I reached out to him today, said, can we reschedule for next week? He said, at another funeral now, I'll circle back to you next week. This one is touching the country in a way that the other wars have not touched this country. And in other wars, for example, the Yom Kippur, where there were about 2,000 soldiers who were killed, which is a huge number for a small country like this. And we're at, I forget the number now of dead, but it's 700, 800 dead, maybe it's more than that, but those are civilians. Why it's a civilian army, it's still a very, very different feel. You either know somebody who died, or everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who died. And I will say, I have a good friend of mine, Mohammed Dawash, a Palestinian Israeli, amazing peace activist. He lost his cousin, a Palestinian Israeli, who was a nurse, who was at this festival in the woods, where young people were just mowed down, and he lost his life there.
One of the things that's always impressed me about your work over at the Arav Institute and the kibbutz is that you work together with Palestinians. One of the main objectives, it seems like, is to bring together the two parties to work cooperatively. I guess I'm just wondering, as you've been talking to some of your Palestinian friends and contacts, what has been their reaction to it? Do they kind of see this as a provocative atrocity, a tragedy, or is it more nuanced and complicated for them?
It's across the spectrum. At the end of the day, Palestinians and Israelis who may agree or disagree on the politics are here for each other. Unfortunately, we've seen this before. We haven't had this kind of war, but we've had other problems during the course of the years when I've been here at the Institute. And it is amazing to see these students there for each other, able to have the difficult conversations, but are able to see past and beyond that. And they're hard moments. 4 of this Israeli students here got called up to go into the reserves to fight in this war. And some have come back for a day or two to get stuff or whatever. They come back in their military uniform, and that's incredibly difficult for a Palestinian to see, even though they know the person behind the uniform. But at the end of the day, they understand that their relationship is bigger and more powerful than this conflict. And that's the power of what we're able to do. I'm in touch with some former students of ours in Gaza. I'm trying, one of our early graduates from Gaza is now an American citizen. His mother is in Gaza, and I'm working with actually Senator Welch's office and the State Department to try to get her out. Not very easy to do, but we do what we can. And I wrote to one of the alumni in Gaza and said, I just really feel incredibly helpless. Can't do anything for you. And sent me back an emoji of 2 people hugging each other. And those are our relationships here, even in dark times like this. And we're the model of what can be. That's why I get up and do this work, and why so many of us do this, why the other 170 organizations of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. There are the voices of no compromise, the voices of hate, the voices that will not listen to the other side. And then there are other voices that do. And we need to learn how to speak louder and take over the conversation, because otherwise you see the results of what happens when it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking on the same day that President Biden arrived in Israel to have conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu and presumably other leaders in the region. Of course, wasn't all that long ago that it seemed like things were kind of moving in a positive direction, where the leaders of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, the U.S. were all kind of coming to some sort of, well, it seemed like an agreement, the Abraham Accords, and that finally some of the long-term difficulties the region has experienced over the past century or so would finally begin to be tamped down a little bit. We have that going on. We also have this horrific event that happened in Gaza where an explosion happened at a hospital, and my understanding is up to about 500 people may have been killed. And there's a back and forth about who was responsible. Was it an Israeli airstrike? Was it a Palestinian missile that went off course or went in the wrong direction, or something? Given these recent events within the last 24 hours of when we're talking, I mean, how do you think that's going to impact the flow of events going forward? I mean, is this just going to add even more gasoline to an already incendiary fire, or will it be maybe something that people will say, whoa, we got to stop this now, otherwise we're going to see a wider conflict that could pull in other countries as well?
Yeah, let me refer to the hospital first. It's absolutely tragic, these 500 Palestinians who died there. And yeah, there's this war over who did it. And, I tend to believe that Islamic Jihad did it. I'm going to say this because, once these horrific, unimaginable atrocities came out of babies beheaded in kibbutzim, women raped, and Hamas, and we don't do that. Well, they did do it, and evidence has come out that they've done it. The Israeli intelligence services have released the radio messages of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, recognizing that it was their missile that hit this hospital. And so there are things that certainly Israel needs to answer for in this war, but on that one, it does not seem to be the case. But at the end of the day, it's tragic, and this is a war that Hamas did. Hamas started this war. Israel did not. In terms of the long-term ramifications, it seems to be that Iran's fingerprints are all over this, in terms of aiding Hamas in this very thoughtful, calculated, sophisticated attack, and in terms of how they are aiding and coordinating with Hezbollah on the Lebanese border. And in some ways, the instigator of what brought about the Abraham Accords, and even there seemed to be this rapprochement going on between the United States and Saudi Arabia and Israel, is the Iranian factor. That Iranian factor is still there. And if anything, all the countries in the region see that even more now. And so while the pain and horror of this war is there now, and the Arab countries, need to respond to it in the way that they are responding. At the end, the day after, if I will, come yesterday, those dynamics are still going to be in play. And I would also add to what you said earlier, people can see just how this conflict can quickly get out of hand and become a regional conflict. And I think there will be more efforts to try to address the issues of why this conflict has not been settled. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but whenever there's a shakeup, and particularly if the Israeli prime minister changes, if Hamas is weakened in whatever form during this, there's going to be a shuffling of the chessboard, and that may open up some possibilities as we go forward.
Does the Palestinian Authority that governs the West Bank have any kind of sway or influence with the Hamas leadership in Gaza? I mean, it's kind of confusing from the outside, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have these two separate states, run by two different governments, which were, up until I think, 2006, were basically the same political entity, but then they split apart. And so the Hamas leadership and the leadership on the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, they're not on the same page with a lot of stuff, I assume.
Yeah, there's been this long-term rivalry between Hamas and Fatah, or the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank. Every time they try to have a rapprochement to get together, it never succeeds. And so there's really no influence that Abbas has on what's taking place in Gaza right now. I will say this also, a poll was done that if there could be free elections in Gaza, which right now there can't be because it's a religious dictatorship, Hamas would only get to like 13% of the vote. And so we need to keep that in mind as well. They do not even have the support of the people who they terrorize and in theory are liberating. So, and it's tragic. It's tragic for all sides because of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, because it seems like in addition to all the horrible casualties and deaths that have resulted since October 7th, the long-range possibilities for a stable peace settlement between all the sides involved just seems to be even farther away than ever. I mean, is this going to? You said earlier that this sets things back over 100 years. I mean, is it completely, now impossible to imagine like some kind of solution that would provide long-term stable peace between Israel and Palestine and between Israel and Gaza, or however things would be divided? Is that just now out the window for?
No, it's absolutely. I mean, it's like, if we can learn from history a little bit here. We are, for the most part, with little minor exceptions, we've had basically peace in Europe for decades now. Something it's very hard to find, in history books. We learned lessons we learned from our mistakes in World War I after what we did with Europe after World War II, and that was a huge change. If we look at Northern Ireland, which people thought was hopeless, we look at South Africa. I was watching it's the World Cup rugby match taking place now. And I watched the South African team play the other night with a good friend of mine from South Africa here. And they have their national anthem in 4 languages, languages and peoples that were, killing each other not that long ago. And so I can look hopeless and feel hopeless. And it certainly is dark right now. That doesn't mean that it has to or will stay that way. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think we need to get away from this notion that just because it's so horrible, this is how it's always going to be. And we have other models that we can learn from, truth be told. And a lot of people actually go to the Northern Ireland model here when they think about how do we get out of this.
I meant to ask, or have you explained to us at the start of our talk where you were in Israel. You're down in the southern part of the state? You're not kind of right on the edge of the Gaza border.
The southern part of Israel is really narrow. And this thing called the Arava Valley here. It's actually part of the Syrian-African Rift. It's quite dramatic. So we're down here about 30 miles north of Eilat in Israel and Aqaba in Jordan. We're literally on the Israeli-Jordanian border. And as the crow flies, about 5 miles to Egypt. So we're way, way, way down in the south here.
So right now, there's no conflict going on right down there in that corner.
There's no conflict going on, but the gate of the kibbutz is locked. We have guards all the time. Actually, as I'm speaking now, there's a drill going on. And so while there's nothing here, thank God, this situation is being taken very, very seriously. And so we act accordingly. And other changes security-wise have been taking place as well.
So I understand it's typical for most Israeli families to have a safe room to go to in the event.
Yeah.
There's a place where it's a little bit more secure and it sounds like a bit of a bomb shelter or something like that.
Well, yeah, there's since the Iraq War, there's been safe rooms in homes, but older buildings like the house we're in on the kibbutz, other houses on the kibbutz have the safe rooms. We actually have an app on our phone that if missiles come, we have 3 minutes to get to one of the bomb shelters nearby here.
Wow, so this is, I assume this is meant teaching and doing the usual work you'd be doing on the environmental questions. Come to a dead stop.
Well, last week, most of the classes went on Zoom because not all the professors could come from the north. This week, some are coming from the north and others are continuing on Zoom. One of the things that I do with the students, besides different sessions with them, is I take them on hikes. And it's really important to get them out of, this physical space and get them back into the environment, get to nature. I teach them along the way various things, and we bond, and we have the conversations that need to take place as well. And that's really, really important, very, very powerful also.
I was going to ask you also, one of the interesting effects of this has been to shift over back here to the United States. And I was reminded that the last time we had a conversation with you, you were here, right here at this table with me and Don Keelan back in July, I think it was, for one of our civil discussion shows. And viewers can watch that show going to our website at GNAT-TV.org. Has been the, I'm not sure if upheaval is the right word, but certainly a bit of turmoil on some U.S. college campuses around the free speech question. There are pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian factions on several college campuses. Harvard, Stanford, NYU, Columbia University are four that I'm aware of, and there's probably many others, where there's been a lot of nasty back and forth between the two groups. Law firms saying they're not going to hire somebody who signed one of the documents, one side or the other. What do you make of that? I mean, is that a ridiculous
I would say
it's
indicative of what's been, taking place over the last, couple of years in the United States in terms of the inability on lots of issues to have thoughtful exchanges of ideas. What I will say about, at least in terms of this particular conflict, I really detest. I wrote a piece in Vermont Digger last year. It starts off, I'm a Zionist, but I'm not pro-Israeli, nor am I pro-Palestinian. And I go on to explain that I think when we have these labels of pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, whatever it is, you then have the inability to do the self-critique of your view and your side, and then able to really hear the other voice. And that's part of the problem when people take on these labels, I'm pro this, I'm pro that. I'm pro-solution, it may sound trait, right? But that's what we need to do, is we learn, really be able to listen and hear the other, because we might be wrong. And to have the humility when we go into account, to be so sure, fine, but still be open. And that's part of what we lost in America, in our democracy. Congress certainly is not modeling that. And it's a great challenge to this democracy of ours. And this particular issue is certainly a fault line in all of that.
So a very complicated situation, it sounds like, and one which I'm sure is going to get as far from over, I guess. Unfortunately, I mean, do you think there's any hope at all that the rabbit could get pulled out of the hat, perhaps as a result of President Biden's visit? I mean, it strikes me as that's a remarkable trip that he's taking, very risky, I would think, on any number of levels. I mean, if that doesn't kind of work to kind of at least pull the parties together to at least get into inside the same room and talk over some of these issues, I mean, are we just going to be looking at a long-term festering problem where it's just going to be just more, even for people of goodwill on both sides, to be able to kind of move beyond this and say we've got to look at the long-term picture and what we want in the long run, not just be kind of consumed by our passions of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy, and I don't want to pretend it's going to be easy at all. And there are so many factors in play here now, and so I don't know the answer to that question. What I will say this, and I'm going to circle back to this work that I do in life, and bouncing back and forth between Vermont and here for the last 26, 27 years, is what Arava is able to model and the other organizations of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. And the second day of the war, I was actually when everyone's volunteered to do different things. So I volunteered to put water, 10-liter bottles of water, in all the different bomb shelters, God forbid if they're needed. And I was kind of thinking what the reality of that means, and I'm ready to leave the office. And David Lair, our former executive director, who still works at the Institute doing very important work, had come to this room, and I then heard this amazing presentation by a group of Israeli Jews, Palestinian Israelis, and Palestinians from the West Bank. Some are students of Malama and others, who wanted to create a Israeli-Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, Christian village here in the Arava Valley in southern Israel. And they were just amazing to listen to. And they want to get away from these notions of majority, minority, and create a real society where people can really be who they are. And to hear that, well, not so far from here, this horrible bloodshed and wars going on, but they could still have that vision and still wanted to work on it that day. Three Israeli alum from the Institute have formed a WhatsApp group called Voices of Solidarity that just in this week has already 500 WhatsApp members. And these are messages of solidarity between Israelis and Palestinians, messages of hope, messages of a different model of what can be. And so that's what needs to be grown. As you know, the Congress a number of years ago passed the Middle East Peace Partners Act, $50 million for each of the next 5 years to bring Israelis and Palestinians or work in organizations, what we do, and the other members of the alliance. And that's the model. That's where the investment needs to go. In Northern Ireland, they were spending, by the way, $40 per capita on that kind of work. We're only doing $2 here. We have to change perceptions and understandings of each other. And that is an investment. And NEPA was a great start, and Senator Leahy put me on the advisory board, which I'm gratefully thankful for. But the international community needs to come together. And that's one piece of the puzzle. Because until the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians who don't want this to happen, we've got the extremists, we know what they want to do. But the vast majority who want a different future but can't imagine it and don't know about this kind of work, haven't been exposed to it, and we have to get better at how we do that. For me, that's a piece of the puzzle. That's why I get up every morning and do what I do. This poem came to me that I wrote in my head, so I'd like to share it with you all. We say a number of times in our prayers, Oseh Shalom ben Womav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel. May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel and to all who dwell on earth. With all due respect, I don't care about God helping with peace in heaven. There are enough righteous souls and angels there to figure it out. But here on earth, we need so much more help. We read in the Torah, Zelo b'shamayim hu, it is not in heaven. Our focus is here, not there. So God, let heaven make peace on its own. But down here, your help we need so much more than they do on high.
Well, and thanks to you for being with us. Hope you found this program interesting. Hard to see how it couldn't be. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.